This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the very niche and kind of geeky details of modern warfare with me, Jake Hanrahan. For this episode, we're speaking to journalist Janet Basurto. She's going to be telling us about the Zapatista movement and how their militant wing, the EZLN, are basically gearing up to potentially go back to war with the Mexican government right now. The EZLN, the Zapatistas, they're socialist libertarians, and they control their own kind of autonomous zone in a place called Chiapas. They've been doing their thing down there, but now it looks like the government want to build right through their land, and they've basically said, look, we're not having it, and they're also surrounded by military bases, so things aren't looking good. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please do consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront. So first, maybe explain who the EZLN are, the Zapatistas, because, you know, obviously there's this situation with them at the minute, but a lot of people have probably never heard of them, despite them being quite a big group. You know, maybe you can go into the history and what they're all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So the EZLN is the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional, which is kind of their paramilitary group that started in Chiapas. And a little bit of the background within Chiapas as well is that during this time, it's one of the southernmost states in Mexico. It borders Guatemala. And during this time, it's one of the poorest states. Half of the people didn't have running water, didn't have sewage systems. 90% of the people lived in extreme poverty. I mean, the education levels were abhorrent. And children died of curable diseases. So, I mean, you can feel that there is this marginalized community there way before the EZLN started. Another big issue was that big ranch families kind of owned the best land and privatized the land. So these communities were set up to have kind of ejidos, like this communal land where each can grow their own and prosper within themselves, and the privatization of land started marginalizing them even further. And then we enter into the whole NAFTA agreement, which this is one of the big catalysts why the movement started raising arms and became kind of like a full-on resistance movement at this point.
And what year was this? When did all this start?
Right, this was in 94. So the kind of call to arms started in 94, but I went too ahead of myself. So the Zapatistas themselves actually started in 83. It started with six kind of founders. Subcomandante Marcos was one of the founders. He was one of the three mestizos. And a mestizo is kind of this Spanish hybrid of kind of the newer Mexican descendants, let's say. And then three indigenous. And then by 86, there were 12, and Subcomandante Marcos was the only mestizo. He kind of used his platform to communicate with the wider elite Mexico and then these indigenous populations that most of whom didn't speak Spanish. I mean, they still retain very much their indigenous culture and language.
Maybe explain a little bit about the indigenous side of this. I mean, I don't know a lot about the indigenous peoples of Mexico.
Yeah, so around this southern population, we have kind of the Mayan descendants. So within Chiapas, you have over five different ethnic populations, and they all kind of just collectively live together. So within all of these communities, you speak different languages.
So they came together to stop what exactly? Their land's getting kind of moved in on?
Yeah, and this kind of like neoliberal push for Mexico. I mean, when NAFTA was signed, it was promised to bring Mexico into the first world. But unfortunately, what we know now is that it very much marginalized already impoverished communities. It flooded the market with subsidized corn that threatened over 1 million of the corn growers. And then what Carlos Salinas did, the president during 1991, he also revoked Article 27, which was kind of one of the last promises that protected indigenous territory and communities. And that was seen as, the lifting was seen as the preemption for NAFTA. What Article 27 was one of those constitutional amendments that Emiliano Zapata basically won during the Mexican Revolution. And this is where the Zapatistas take their name. Emiliano Zapata was a southern kind of guerrilla fighter that joined forces against then President Porfirio Diaz. And he basically fought for indigenous rights. I mean, the same exact thing that was happening to the Zapatistas then was happening to Zapata. The elites were taking all of the land. They were privatizing it, making huge ranches that weren't just making use of the land. I mean, it was a huge distinction between the wealthy and the poor. And what Zapata did when he mobilized his campesinos, the peasants, he basically just started taking back the land by force.
Right. So the Zapatistas kind of came together and said, right, we've got to do the same thing. But when did the militant wing form? You know, like the EZLN, like you said, is the militant wing essentially of the Zapatista movement. When did they decide, right, we have to take up arms and let's go?
Yeah, so they had been training since they formed. They kind of started their own call to arms. They knew that was an eventuality of the movement. I mean, any peaceful negotiations weren't going on. The government weren't reaching out to them at all. So the mobilization started from 1983 and it culminated into January 1st, 1994, which was kind of the signing of the NAFTA, when NAFTA would finally come into fruition. And also it was very advantageous for them because everybody was like drunk off their minds from New Year's. So they descended in San Cristobal de las Casas, kind of this middle ground or this plaza in Chiapas, and took over the presidential palace, and kind of made their declaration of war to the Mexican government.
And they took it how? Like, how many of them? There was like quite a lot of them, right? Turned up with rifles and old guns and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the number per se. I mean, but there are a lot of photos. It was just squads of guerrilla. They some of them had AK-47s. Others had like old guns from the 1910 Mexican Revolution.
Yeah, like Mausers and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And some carried sticks. And then I even saw cardboard cutouts of rifles. So, I mean, they were...
to trick people.
Yeah, they were kind of winging it at this point. And a violence... I mean, blood, I don't think, was their goal. Like the main goal was just getting the message out. Immediately once they made the declaration of war, they kind of sent it to medias, to main media stations within Mexico City and abroad. So they really wanted to get their point across. Unfortunately, violence had to kind of be the solution here. They immediately took 5 municipalities just because they caught the military off guard. They broke into a prison and liberated 200 of the prisoners, of indigenous prisoners.
Such a good idea to do it on like New Year's Day. You know what I mean? Like when everyone's like hungover.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the funny thing is that a journalist that was like leaving a party, he was like still half drunk. He was the one that caught them, and they delivered their declaration of war to him. He's like, just pass it on to your newspaper. He's like, what the fuck is going on? What's going on here? But yeah, I mean, it did turn bloody. once the military obviously caught wind of what was going on, they descended upon San Cristobal in Ocosingo, a municipality within Chiapas. That turned out to be, I think, one of the bloodiest days. The military just opened fire in a marketplace, ended up killing several civilians. And then the military blamed it on the Zapatistas as well. They said that these people, they kind of put responsibility on them for 150 homicides. And so, I mean, this is where we see kind of the narrative as well start to cast them as
terrorists,
brutal,
basically.
Yeah, terrorists. I mean, the president went on and said that these guys are trained by foreign paramilitaries.
They always say that, like American or Israeli or something, you know what I mean? Let's talk about what they actually believed in then, you know, what did they want? Because they had this declaration, but it wasn't just like, right, give us the land back. They have a specific kind of political ideology and stuff like that. You know, they're like like socialist libertarians, right? Like, what did they want for their areas?
Right. So they wanted to be included in the national dialogue. I mean, their entire thing, or one of their biggest calls is for the recognition of indigenous rights and culture. I mean, throughout this time, Mexico would say, yes, we love them, we care for them, we do this, but it was kind of this facade of, you know, there are museum pieces. So they wanted to be recognized down to support, aid, resources, be included within the political arena, a newer political arena, because they also have voiced calls to boycott elections because they're inherently corrupt. I mean, the platform as it's built at this moment is inherently corrupt to them. So their new call is for a new campaign and a new political movement, whole autonomy for the regions. So, I mean, I don't know if that answers it correctly, but it's full autonomy of their rights, but with a kind of a more integrated Mexican model.
Right, and specifically they want autonomous zones and, you know, semi-leaderless kind of representation, right?
Yeah. I mean, the way that their model is made right now, they have about 43 territories, autonomous zones, in Chiapas. So they're kind of trying to lead by example, and how they made up their governance is basically broken up into autonomous municipalities, and they elect their own governments, which in turn they elect their own kind of representatives to the caracoles, which is kind of this municipality that they've created. They've completely abolished any rules of the Mexican governance. So once you enter into their territory, you completely abide by kind of the Zapatista model, and the Mexican model is kind of thrown out the window.
Right, it's direct democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they make an effort to also translate whatever accordances or agreements they come into. They go back, they translate it into 5 different languages, so all of the indigenous or ethnic groups kind of understand what's going on. They get buy-in from the community, so unless everybody agrees to it or supports this new addendum or whatever it be, they'll continue with it, or they'll go back and sit down and talk. I mean, it's incredibly inclusive model. They have schools, clinics. They've invested in secondhand ambulances.
How did they get to this stage, though? Because, you know, like you said, the military come out, they got slaughtered, essentially. You know, they fought back, but from what I understand, they got pretty badly beaten. How did they then suddenly end up with the space they wanted?
Yeah, so I think one of the most brilliant models that Subcomandante Marcos and I think the entire community did was that they realized that they weren't going to get anything out of peaceful negotiations or hidden negotiations with the government. So they immediately exported their model to the media and to basically anybody that would listen. So right from the get-go, I mean, in the uprising in 94, they had the international media shining a spotlight on them. And I think that's also why the military kind of held back a little bit. I mean, they were pretty gruesome, but they still held back because they knew people were observing them. And as much as the people knew about these indigenous rights, they got a fairly great amount of support from Mexico City. I mean, the moment that the military started raining in on them, they descended in Mexico City in huge protests.
Saying like, leave them alone sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was respect the rights. I mean, like, also there are a lot of indigenous people all over Mexico. So there is an element of support. People understand. People are affiliated. I mean, like, my dad's side is very indigenous. So there is kind of this appreciation and understanding for what they want and what they're fighting for. So, I mean, I think that was one of the biggest things that they were brilliant in, and kind of helped them to become as widely known as they are. I mean, they entered into peaceful negotiations because the people demanded it as well.
After the kind of shootings by the military, the government said to them, like, right, okay, let's talk now.
Yeah. I mean, kind of tongue in cheek, but yeah, let's sit down and talk. Let's hear you out. I mean, from the first kind of iteration of peaceful negotiations, nothing happened. They sat down, the Zapatistas demanded kind of this, collective right of territory. They wanted autonomy. They wanted self-determination. The government at that time said, yeah, sure, let's, yeah, okay. But nothing really set in stone. I mean, the talks didn't go into who owned the land, who got to control the land. So as much as they would say, sure, we love it, we agree with it, I mean, there is no declaration or no, pen to paper kind of agreement. Then after that, so after the first round of negotiations, you have this kind of interim period with the next president is running for election. Carlos Salinas during that time had nominated, let's say, Luis Ronaldo Colosio. And Colosio was I think one of the first ones that came out as like this reformist candidate within the biggest ruling elite kind of government party, the PRI. He came out and he's like, I want to make a better Mexico. And he was the first one that openly talked about ending the dictatorship. And I think that was a sign, at least to the Zapatistas, that, okay, maybe there is something that we can work with. 4 months after Colosio made this speech, he was assassinated. And to this day, I mean, if the listeners want to read into this story, it's really interesting. To this day, there's no concrete kind of fact over who, let's say, coordinated the assassination. There's a lot of skepticism that it was an inside job.
Yeah, that was my immediate thought. And I don't know anything about the situation, but, generally when someone talks about ending dictatorships, it can go quite bad for them.
Oh, I mean, immediately after he made that speech, heads started turning. I mean, Salinas was very much kind of cheering him on immediately after that speech. It was like, oh shit, like maybe like kind of keep it low, don't talk about this. And yeah, I mean, the investigation, 15 people that were coordinating the investigation were also assassinated. So, I mean, if we want to talk about, some some red flags here. Everything about the assassination of Colosio just brings out red flags. I mean, talking to my mom about it, she very much remembers it as kind of, this was like our JFK moment.
Oh, okay, so it's that big.
It was, yeah, I mean, it was, people were enamored with this candidate. He toured everywhere. He brought up huge crowds. Yeah, and then after this, the Zapatistas also said, you know, we're going to suspend the peace talks, and we're back on high alert. So there we go back into kind of this continuation of the armed resistance. Cedillo becomes president during this time. And another controversial part within the Cedillo's presidency was that this memo from the Chase Manhattan Bank had leaked, saying, and this is quote unquote verbatim from the memo, it says the government will need to eliminate the Zapatistas to demonstrate their effective control of the national territory and of security policy. So
wow, so they weren't planning peace talks at all. They wanted to kill them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and immediately after this, the Cedillo wanted to consider them terrorists. They concocted this story about the attorney general said the Zapatistas have caches of explosives all across Mexico and Veracruz, and they sent in the military right again. So, I mean, based on the sequence of events, you also see that there were attempts for peace talks, but those peace talks never amounted to anything, and the military would always just end up on their doorstep. They were patrolling Chiapas and La Realidad, where the Zapatistas were in. Other indigenous communities that were seen as supporting them, sympathizing with them, or allied with them, were displaced, harassed, had their villages ransacked. In 97, there is the Acteal massacre, which was one of the other also peaceful indigenous communities in Chiapas, in Acteal. You never really know if they were affiliated with the Zapatistas or not. They were fully pacifist community, but they got Christians, right? So they were praying. And then this paramilitary group just came in and massacred. And the military and the police were right outside. They were 300 meters away, and nobody came to their aid. For 7 hours, they were being just horribly murdered. I mean, 45 people were killed during this time.
Well, they killed pregnant women as well, right?
Yeah. I believe it was 4 pregnant women and children as well. I mean, you see images of little baby coffins. So from this point, I mean, there is really no incentive for the Zapatistas to come down to the table or to sit down and to negotiate, or for them to lay down their arms. I mean, sign after sign is telling them that the military is not going to support you, or that the Mexican government's not going to support you. The military will continue harassing you and other communities around you that aren't even part of your collective. So, I mean, time after time. There was this regional commander that was kind of assigned to the Chiapas problem by Cedillo, and this guy was a brutal, brutal general. I mean, he had been, he was like the special force expert. He had a doctor in military psychology, and right next to where the Zapatistas community was, he set up this military training camp on jungle warfare. So like this broad kind of show of force right in front of their doorstep. They were trying to kind of, prove that they were going to come, and they were going to come in hard.
So how did the Zapatistas end up with their areas then? Because they've been living quite peacefully for a while now, right? And they're thriving down there, from what I understand. How did it end up being okay, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, throughout this period of the sequence of peaceful accords, they started amassing wide support by Mexican elites and different communities. They opened up their territory to, for foreigners and celebrities and people who just wanted to see. So over time, they started generating a lot of support. And then they finally sat down again with Mexican Congress and they passed the Concordia Law and pacification, I think it was called. And that promised autonomy along with the San Andreas Accords that kind of just were tacitly saying, we will support your autonomy. So I think over time it was just way too difficult for the military or the government to do anything. I mean, it's going to be an endless battle, let's say. So for the moment, they've sustained their autonomy. Nothing really has been set in stone to let's say to enhance it, but there are certain mediums that have been set up to at least tacitly protect it.
And you said before the Zapatistas rose up and everything, the reason they rose up, it was very poor, people were taking their land. What's it like now? I've seen things, it looks like it's doing well, but you don't know if it's propaganda or what. Like, what is the situation in Chiapas now?
Yeah, I mean, now they receive a lot of their funding from, or a lot of their resources from coffee production, maize production, beans.
Yeah, I've bought some of the EZLN coffee actually. Like, it's actually good. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, I recommend everybody to buy a little coffee. And they also receive a lot of NGO and international NGO support. So for the moment, they've been able to sustain themselves just because they also believe in kind of growing crops and for their own self-sustenance. But they also do receive a lot of support from NGOs.
Before we go into what's happening now, let's speak about their leader, or what is kind of their, maybe not their leader, but their kind of spokesman, Subcomandante Marcos. Like, he's a big deal, right?
Yeah, he is. He actually goes by Galeano now. He changed his name in 2014 because one of their comrades was assassinated in an ambush. So he kind of took on his name. So he has been kind of leading the charge as their lead spokesperson because he speaks Spanish and he was able to kind of translate and be the face for this movement. He's a mestizo. When the government tried to rain on their parade and declare them as terrorist organizations, they claimed that they revealed his identity. To this day, no one really knows whether that's accurate or not.
He wears a mask all the time, right? The kind of like balaclava, but it's also got a bubble on it.
Yeah, exactly, and a little room for his pipe. Yeah, so they all cover their faces. He said that they hide their faces not to assume kind of this individual identity, but a collective one. Over time, it's also been out of security and protection, and I think now it's become kind of the symbol of the Zapatistas. It's become very iconic of the group. So he had stepped down in, I can't remember, I believe it was 2014, but he's still in the scene, very much so, specifically and also especially because they're kind of calling out to arms again because of the current president AMLO's kind of hopes for building new infrastructure and to bring this fourth transformation of Mexico. So they are now particularly active as of the last couple of months in resistance to this new train.
Right, and Marcos led the fighting originally, right?
Yes. He was kind of seen as a de facto kind of
commander or something.
Yes, military chief, let's say. He did the training and he kind of coordinated. He was the one that inspired kind of buying of the arms, because when he went to Chiapas in 1983, it had a very big kind of alcoholism problem, and I mean, according also to his interviews, never know really what's concocted.
What's bullshit and what isn't.
Or, you know, it's hero of heroes. But he kind of advocated for, let's stop buying so much alcohol or spending our money in so much alcohol, and let's buy arms instead. So he was kind of the leader of this arms mobilization.
And where did they buy the arms from, sorry?
Oh, that's a very good question. I have no idea.
I guess they're kind of not hard to get.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of them are from old, like 1910 Mexican Revolution. So I'm pretty my smartest guess is that they were already within the campesinos, and the peasants kind of already had their own arms. So maybe just buy back from the community or...
Yeah, sure. So what's happening now then? Because things have been kind of peaceful. You know, I've read about what's going on down there, and I know people who've been, and not even necessarily like political people. They've just been and like, wow, they're thriving down there in this little autonomous community. But now they're being threatened by AMLO, right? The government, and you know, there was a declaration around New Year saying they're going to go back to arms and what have you. What's happening? What's going on?
Yeah, so a little bit of the background with AMLO and the relationship, because there is a picture from 1994 with Subcomandante Marcos and AMLO, and that was hugely distributed like last year as kind of, look, they're friends, there's no beef between them, and that's because AMLO had been a politician for, I mean, since the 70s, I think.
And he's like seen as a leftist leader, right?
He is seen as a leftist leader. He had advocated for indigenous rights. Previously, I think he led a committee for indigenous rights within the PRD, within one of the political parties. However, he is seen as not left enough for the Zapatistas. He's seen as kind of more center and a replica of every other president that we've had. So, and to be fair, I mean, AMLO was part of this kind of right wing party from his original, or from the onset of his political career. Over time, he's kind of changed.
Sounds like a politician.
Oh yeah. He's had 3 presidential runs or attempts to run for the presidency, and obviously the third one was a charm, but in these previous 2, he was seen as a resistance candidate, and I think that's what really transcended his image to becoming this kind of leftist champion, that he always decried political elections as fraud, and he decried the corruption, and we need to fix Mexico, and we need to do this, and we need to do that. And I think for many people, he was the answer. Unfortunately, now a year into his presidency, we've yet to see any type of progress. I mean, in terms of security, economy, I think it's been a very slow rise for AMLO. So for him to come in as also the champion of the Zapatistas was very a far-fetched goal, because he's still very much operating within this already established system that the Zapatistas inherently object to. They've gone into a few back and forths. The Zapatistas have called him crazy and manipulative. AMLO has gone back and said, you guys can't divide the country. We need to work together to move Mexico forward. So throughout this time, it's kind of been a back and forth. Unfortunately, what was the nail in the coffin, per se, for the Zapatistas was AMLO's declaration or like new infrastructure proposal to make a train down in the Yucatan Peninsula. So that area is relatively untouched, considering all of other Mexico.
It's an indigenous area, right?
Right. If you've seen, I hate this reference, and I'm kind of hate myself for making it, but if you've seen Apocalypto,
yeah,
you know, that documentary by Mel Gibson, but it's kind of, you know, this is the territory, and obviously it's changed vastly, but it's jungle, it's huge Mayan architecture and archaeological sites around there. So the idea that there's going to be train tracks running through this is devastating for a lot of these communities, specifically who are trying to protect kind of the flora and the fauna of these lands.
Right, and what's the reason why do they have to put the train tracks through there?
Because AMLO wants to dedicate or bring in more tourism to those areas.
So it's not even like you're gonna get more people to work. He just wants to be able to bring more, I don't know, white people basically into the areas.
Yeah, and that's a huge also concern for these communities, because I mean, for a lot of these communities, tourism has brought in a lot of negative consequences. I mean, it's very much exploited their land. A lot of the people that will come in don't particularly care about the history or its nature or what it represents to these communities. So it's very much seen as, you know, a deep exploitation and just blatant disregard by the government to even understand why they oppose it. In December, AMLO stated they had this referendum for the train, and they wanted to see how much support it would garner. And then they set up a referendum where only 2% of eligible voters voted. And then AMLO was like, oh, it passed with overwhelming support, it's great, it's blah. But the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said that even that referendum doesn't comply with the international standards for human rights or with the required consultation and consent that it would require from indigenous communities. And he's also been decried for not informing the citizens of the negative effects, that only the positives. So from the get-go, I mean, this train proposal is starting off on the wrong foot, and I don't see the Zapatistas laying down their arms. They've made basically statements saying that they're willing to be beaten, jailed, disappeared, or even killed to oppose the Mayan train. So this is another call, basically another declaration of war for AMLO.
And I've read that like the military are actually getting closer to the Zapatista areas, that patrols are kind of in places where they weren't. I mean, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's never really stopped. They've kind of pulled out into the outskirts, but I mean, they have a ridiculous number. I think 71 military bases all around Chiapas. So in terms of antagonizing the communities, the military is there for the moment that somebody in command just says, let's rein in, they're going to be there. So absolutely. And I mean, that has deeply pushed other communities to kind of denounce support for the Zapatistas. So, in very much it being a very physical threat, it's also a very psychological threat to supporters of the Zapatistas and to the Zapatistas themselves.
Right, and what have the specifically EZLN said about this? Because they're going to be the guys that end up fighting and dying if it has to go ahead.
They're ready. Yeah, they're flat out. I mean, Comandante Marcos and another one, Samuel, I believe, or I might have been just ruining his name, but they've gone on record saying we're not going to put down our arms. We're not going to stop. We're going to go to death to impede this construction. Right now, they're also seeking legal remedies. So several indigenous other communities that are supporting and also opposing, supporting the Zapatistas and opposing the train. They're going kind of the legal round. So they're appealing to the government for amparos, which I think are kind of injunctions against the building until there's kind of an independent community that assesses or at least sides with them for the destruction of archaeological damage or archaeological sites, for a better understanding of the ecological damage that it'll do. So there's different fronts that they're attempting to appeal to. So I guess we're just going to see the progression. But I mean, the tenders for the train are due out this month. So we're going to see a lot of private corporations and industries also tendering to see, what kind of role they get in the building. So there is this duality and this kind of parallel movement side by side with the train going on. And yeah, it hasn't progressed as far as it goes right now.
I imagine they have a lot more weapons now as well than they did in, 94.
I'm sure.
Yeah. And I read something as well about, there was something like, there are indigenous areas where even cartels are kind of moving in. Have you heard anything about that?
I've heard a lot of that the Zapatistas are working with cartels. I've got no evidence for that. I mean, I've asked different people all across Mexico, even members of the military and police, and I can't get any concrete evidence on that. It's just conjecture and kind of this a big smear campaign that they are drug dealing, they're trafficking. I do think that they would lose a lot of international NGO support if that were the case. And I don't have any evidence for that. Another thing that I've heard is that there are big uranium plants in southern Chiapas that the Zapatistas are trying to exploit, and they're often like cutting deals with other international powers to kind of have access to it. I've also not seen any evidence to that. I've been trying to dig around and haven't seen anything. So you will see a lot of smearing, and that's not to say that some of it may be true, but in terms of the smuggling,
I was gonna say, like, if I was in a little group that's surrounded by military and then the cartels had the guns, I mean, it's not a stretch to think they went, hey, we need some. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, but I hear what you're saying.
Certainly possible, but for the Zapatistas themselves, I haven't.
What do people think of them? Like, certainly I'm obviously like kind of biased in a way because I think what they're doing there, I've read quite a bit about what they're doing politically, and it's kind of it's like a tough libertarian stance, it sounds like, rather than some kind of airy-fairy communist thing. To me, I thought, it sounds like it works. But, like, obviously, I'm not Mexican. I don't know what people think there. What is the general kind of feeling towards them outside of the indigenous community?
Yeah, it's very split. So I've seen a lot of either you kind of hate them and you think that they're annoying and that they should just go away, or you really sympathize with their cause. I mean, right now with the Tren Maya, the train, I've seen an overwhelming kind of denouncing of the Zapatistas, specifically because this train is being seen as this economic, developmental, big infrastructure program that's going to benefit Mexico and that it's going to, bring in prosperity. So there is that kind of annoyance with the group for resisting it. During the uprising itself, I mean, there was a huge propaganda campaign that the Zapatistas were the ones orchestrating the massacres. So I also saw a split. I mean, talking to my mom's family, my family's pretty split also in this. So talking to one side is they, hate them. They want to see them gone. They think that they're a nuisance because they do try to, or they have been seen as humiliating the government. Of opposing of why don't these, and very racist comments as well. It's like, why don't these, they call them Indians, like, why don't these Indians want to like modernize? Like, they need to get out of their villages, they need to. So you do see a lot of that, which is also saying that there is a quite dynamic racist problem within Mexico against the indigenous people. So I think it just depends on kind of what area and who you're talking to that you'll see one or the other.
Right, yeah, I mean, and there is whilst it's like, well, they should be able to defend their own land and their own way of life, I can kind of understand where some people are like, hey, we're poor here, just let this train go through, what the fuck, you know what I mean? Like, if the government has billed it as kind of, money's going to come in. But it sounds to me like history is kind of repeating itself, like in the 90s, they're fighting this kind of neoliberal government again. It sounds very similar.
Yeah, absolutely. And it very much is. I mean, they see it as it's just a different figurehead, but it's the same platform. So it's the same government. It's just giving us a different, face. And I think that there's a lot more resistance for AMLO now because they see him as a charade pretending to care. Whereas the other presidents, they flat out were very open and consistent with where you knew where they stood, and you knew that they wanted to get rid of the Zapatistas. This kind of facade that AMLO is playing, I think, is really more annoying and kind of more damaging to them.
Yeah, it's interesting, that concept, because, well, I don't really think it exists anymore because of this kind of post-truth world shit. But, like, I remember, like maybe 10 years ago, like a liberal government could get away with a lot more bad things than a Republican one or a right-wing one almost, just because of that thing of, oh no, we care. So then, the kind of very normal stance is just to go, they're the good guys. They're in favor of, like Obama, he's in favor of gay rights and whatever. He's good guy. Well, also he's in favor of like, destroying the rights of journalists and drone striking kids in Yemen. You know what I mean? It's like, it's that kind of concept, right? They can get away with it. Do you think they will? Like, do you think that this is going to lead to a conflict, or do you think it will be resolved?
I don't see the train stopping, and I don't see the Zapatistas stopping. So, I mean, maybe there could be the opportunity for, a international mediator, or, I mean, I don't know, because 90% of the investors in this train are all private foreign companies.
Wow, we know what happens when they get involved.
Right, in terms of the incentives for anybody to stop, I'm kind of cringing to see, because I don't see it ending very well.
No, me either. Do you think this year? You think like it's going to kick off this year?
It depends on how fast the kind of their own building schedules are recording. I think right now they're setting up the tenders, and then they're going to decide how the construction goes in and kind of what that kind of the logistics. But the disapproval for them and the protests, the Zapatistas have protests right now in Mexico City. So I'm actually gonna go and observe some and see how they are kind of coming to fruition. But yeah, the protests are there, the demonstrations are there, the call to arms are there. Everything right now is the news. I mean, every week I get reports that something is cooking up with the Zapatistas, so it's getting pretty heated.
Yeah, it sounds tense. Janet, is there anything else you want to say before we just leave it there?
No, I think that's about it.
Me too. Where can people get hold of you if they want to see you and follow your work and that?
I guess Twitter, Janet, Janet _ Basurto, Basurto.
Brilliant. Thanks, Janet. That was Janet Basurto speaking about the EZLN, the Zapatistas, and the fact they might have to go back to war with the Mexican government, the same one that said in the start that they respected indigenous rights, and are now like, fuck it, let's build a train. But there you go. Definitely follow Janet. And also I would say follow Demolaire on Instagram. They're really useful for EZLN information and anything in Mexico. It's basically like independent news source for Mexico. It's very good. It's Instagram.com/DEMOLER_. That's to be honest, that's where I first found out about the fact that the EZLN are, going back to war and that. So yeah, check them out. If you like what we're doing, as usual, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. The more we get on Patreon, the more popular front you get. That's how it works. It all goes back in. 100% independent. That's how we do it. We do not have any corporate sponsorship, nothing like that. Fuck all that. Patreon.com/popularfront. And it's not like we're like, please give us money. We've got bonus episodes, access to the research Discord, all sorts of stuff there. Narrated articles. Yeah, there's a lot going on. You get a lot of stuff for very little. It's us selling a subscription to more Popular Front content. Essentially, I just read that the New York Times have made $24 million in profit with their, to lift the paywall, which, fuck me, mate, like, how can you compete? But anyway, patreon.com/popularfront. This episode was sponsored by thedefensepost.com, defense with an S. Definitely check them out if you want to get informed and stay informed on what's going on in the world in regards to conflict, war, everything like that. Defensepost with an S.com. Also, this episode is sponsored by Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland in America. Definitely check them out. They're all independent. Everything there is ethically sourced. Check them out. Tell them that Popular Front sent you. Go to 3875 SW Bond Avenue, Portland's South Waterfront neighborhood. Definitely go and say hello to them. Tell us we sent you. They're a good bunch of lads. Again, if people do want to sponsor Popular Front episodes, get in contact with me at jake@hanrahan.tv. That's HANRAHAN. Like I've said, I am not having the usual thing of sponsors like mattresses and the Calm app and fucking, what's that stupid mobile game that is on every fucking YouTube channel you watch now? Some dungeon shit. Anyway, I'm not having all that because obviously it's bollocks and it's just kind of like selling out, like we do very good numbers on the podcast, but it's like, what's the point if you're just going to go against everything I've said that has built this? So what we are doing is anyone else that's independent and they have a business that's independent and, we think, yeah, that's cool, that's good, then we will, we'll people can sponsor. Some people have come to me and it's like, nah, man, it can't run like that. It has to be look, independent stuff is very hard to do in the world of like corporations and all of that. So we like to help everybody out, help each other. So yeah, get in touch if you want. We can maybe talk, maybe not, I don't know. Please subscribe to our YouTube, youtube.com/popularfront. By the time this episode comes out, it will be the week when the third and final part of the Hong Kong documentary is out. I know it took ages, but mate, I have had buckloads to do. In future, I will definitely hire an editor. Like, I can edit, but I don't enjoy it very much, and it takes me a very long time whilst doing the podcast and everything else like that. Do let me know if you think there's somewhere else we should go and cover on the ground doing another doc, because, you know, we are going to do more docs this year. Right now I'm thinking maybe Chile, maybe go back to Ukraine. I don't know. Let us know what you think. Get in touch with us. Probably best place is shout us on Twitter, twitter.com/popularfrontco, or Instagram, if we're not banned again by the time you hear this, instagram.com/popular.front. Or if you want, get in touch with me on my Twitter, twitter.com/Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. Yeah, that's everything, I think. Thank you very much to the following Patreons: Adam Bergsnyder, Amy Rupert, Andrew Hurley, Axel Iverson, Azad, Brian McLaughlin, Callum Ross, Chad Walker, Christopher Martin, Craig Miller, Dan Dunham, Daniel Shearer, Diana Gorvanek, E. Louise Larson, Emiliano, Emily Molly, Fletcher Tate, Frank Austin, James from Discord, Janet Basurto from this episode, Joanne, by the way, that's not, you know, no one pays to get on Popular Front, you know, she just happened to be, but I've known Janet well, known her work, she's cool. Don't worry, there's no conspiracy, no corruption. Joanne Stocker, Joel Tambusi, Josh, Jungle King Virapan, please tell me if I'm saying that wrong, mate. Kay Hardy Roberts, Lawrence Abrahams, Ari from Discord, Patrick Bronte, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Q-Ball, Rohan Abari, Ryan Sandercock, Scartoon Music, Sebastian from the Discord, Sentry, Sarushe Hawazi, Stephen Davila, Tom Lochrin, Tony Bin, Vida Provost, and Zachary Hinch. Thank you all very much. Without you lot, this would fall on its ass very quickly. Thank you very much. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home, and the outro was by Sam Black. Listen to his music at soundcloud.com/son-of-old.